Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to the Holtz Mitchell channel and a new episode of Random Links. Well, as you can see, tell by my voice, I'm a little under the weather. The wonders of AC sometimes bite you in the ass a little harder than you might think in the summertime, and so got myself a hell of a summertime cold. But anyway, on to today's subject. We're going to be talking a little bit about the recent spate of fires up in Spokane and Coeur up in that area. So the big question is, what's driving all this? Now, of course, the brain surgeons and media would have you believing that climate change is the driving factor here, but when you look at the weather report and see that the temperatures and the precip are well within seasonal norms for the area and for the region, it becomes kind of a moot point. Climate change takes place over geological time periods and not overnight, and therefore climate change is not the driving factor in this recent bout of fire. Fire is quite normal for the area. It's predominantly, as you can see, ponderosa pine, and these are a fire dependent species. So what happens now, as you can see with this guy right here, now when fire comes through an area and burns something, it creates a seed bed for ponderosa pine, other pines, being a pioneer species, and so it spreads out like dog hair, and then once it takes root, it grows fairly dense. Off to my rear over here, you guys can probably see a little bit of what I'm talking about. We'll take a closer look at this little patch over here in a bit, because it burned here a year or two ago, and it's precisely the problem that I'm talking about. So what can you do, or what is the driving factor behind these fires? Well, one is land use changes. Farming has become more productive, and yields of per acre have been going higher, and so as farming practices change, and then also land use has changed, where smaller farmers, subsistence farmers, go out of business and then bigger ones take over. Some of these plots just never get utilized for agriculture ever again, so nature encroaches on it and starts taking it back over, and that's what we're seeing a lot up in the Spokane Cheney area where these fires have occurred. And then the wildland urban interface is moving into these areas as well. So the other factor is over a century's worth of fire suppression. Fire suppression has caused a lot of buildup of detritus, in other words, dead material. As you can see, I'm in a prairie grass here that's waist high almost, and underneath my feet there's quite a mat of old dead grass, and this is what drives these fires. This is what makes them hot. And so here we have some dead grass. As you can see, it gets quite deep. We're down to 4 inches now, and the flammable material can actually reach quite a ways into the top soil layers. That's the biggest issue why these fires get going so quickly. Now the other thing is fire ladders. If you look at this guy here, he's got limbs almost to the ground, and as we know, heat rises. So when a fire sweeps through these prairie grasses, which they are dependent on, these grasses like fire, it regenerates them faster. It creates an acceleration in the nutrient cycling that allows these grasses to grow a little better, and then also it takes care of the weeds. In my place up in Elk City, I had it back on a fire regime. I don't recommend this to just anybody. You have to be very, very careful when you're dealing with fire, especially if you're going to return your property to a fire regime. Best time to do it's in the spring when the snow's melting off and the patches of grass aren't getting very big, and you can go out, burn them off, allow them to go out. If there's still snow on the ground, that's about the best time to do it. In Elk City it was usually in April. In lower elevations it's a lot earlier, so you might, if you're going to do that, use extreme caution. Again, I don't recommend it, but in some cases it's definitely warranted. And then also it mimics the natural ecosystem, or the dynamics of the natural ecosystem of the area. So, but anyway, kind of digress here. So the fire ladders, what happens is the fire will come creeping along the ground, and you know, the flames are usually between 3 and 4 feet high, depending on how much detritus is underneath, matted down underneath the grass. And so what you get is essentially an intense or semi-intense ground fire situation. And then as it approaches growth like this, you know, 3 feet is roughly about yay high, you know, or thereabouts. And so it reaches into the lower limbs of these younger trees, and then it can climb into the canopy. And then once it's in the canopy, it creates its own wind, and then it really takes off and gets going. Local fire crews and state fire crews, like from the Idaho Department of Lands, I used to work for them many years ago, and one of our neighboring agencies was SITPA, the Southern Idaho Timber Protective Association. We go out, we'd stomp them out. Forest Service, because there's been so many changes within the fiscal structure of the Forest Service, they allow their forest fires to go project in order to secure funding for the following fiscal year. It's just kind of the way it went, thanks to Clinton and his dumbasses. So it's just kind of the where it's at. But Forest Service, like I say, they like them to go project. They will actively foster a fire. They'll even go as far as dumping diesel fuel on it to get it going. Dumb, I know, but that's kind of where the Forest Service is at. Anyway, as these fires then reach the canopy, then they take off, they generate their own wind, they generate their own weather, and then it's, you know, then it's all out to the races. And this is where these fires get big fast. Now, what can you do as a small private landowner in order to prevent your place from going up in smoke? Well, it's real simple. You create what's called defensible space. And what you do, especially on trees like this, you know, this guy's, I don't know, about 15, 16 feet tall already. So what you'd want to do is trim back these limbs to the point where if a fire came through along the ground here, it won't be able to reach up into the canopy and then take off and go. Same thing with trees that are close to any structures. You want to definitely try to limit any trees like this close to any buildings that you have on your property. It's best to cut them down, but a lot of folks shy away from it. They're trying to create a natural aesthetic, and so you definitely got to keep these guys clean. And then of course around your house, around any outbuildings and stuff, you want to keep a, you know, a 20 to 30 foot perimeter mowed if you can. And then the same thing going into a stand like this, you got to trim those limbs back and take away that fire ladder. When you look at this, you can see it started probably along here. I'm guessing probably somebody flung a cigarette butt out a window of a passing vehicle, and it just kind of smoldered for a while, and then it took off. The winds, now there's this phenomenon called diurnal winds. You're probably picking up on it a little bit in the microphone. Early morning you'll have winds going one direction, and then in the afternoons the winds will switch and go the other direction, and this is what creates some of this or accelerates the spread of the fire, is the changing of that, you know, that change in wind direction. So you got to be proactive, clean up your trees a little bit. Now Randy Richard in the shop, I'll put a link to his channel below and some of the videos that he's done. He's done a really good job of creating defensible space around his property. So I'll link to those videos so that folks can kind of get a better idea of what's going on. But anyway, that's kind of where we're at. We'll take some drone shots and then some other shots of some other trees farther over here. You know, they're slick all the way up, but like I say, you got to get that first 6 feet or so, 6 to 8 feet clear, so that the flames don't have any mode of attack and climbing up into the canopy. And older trees, of course, have already shed a lot of their lower limbs, but it's also a good idea to trim out the dead stuff, because that is a fire hazard. And then if you're in the process, you know, pick that stuff up and pile it up somewhere, and then dispose of it, burn it, chip it, do whatever you got to do to get rid of that fuel. And then of course, if you're so inclined, return your property to a fire regime. But again, now if you want to do that, my recommendation is go see your local forestry, like in California, CDF, in Idaho, the Idaho Department of Lands. I'm not sure who'd be in charge over in Washington and Oregon. I'm guessing it's probably the Department of Natural Resources, just guessing. If anybody has anything closer on that, please, by all means, put it in the comment section below. And then, you know, help, you know, spread the word to other folks there, you know, that are in the same boat, so to speak. But anyway, that's kind of the recommendation I would give. And then your local forester will come out, either will give you kind of a blanket idea of what to do, when to do it, and how to do it, or they'll come out and they'll actually take a look at your property and then give you a good recommendation that way. I know the Idaho Department of Lands is really easy to work with in that department. California Department of Forestry, I can't comment. I didn't have too much to do with those folks when I worked in California, but I do know they exist, and then they are committed to fire safety in that wildland urban interface. And so the thing of it is, with when you're creating defensible space, when you're trimming up your trees, for example, you only have to do it once. Once you get that, you know, that height, those limbs cut back, that's all you have to do. There won't be any more trimming later on if you leave those trees alone. Same thing with the dead wood in the trees. If you get it out of there, it's gone forever. And so that's one thing you only have to do once. Mowing, that's kind of an annual thing or a biannual thing, depending on how much you let it accumulate. So anyway, let's take a look around, do some drone shots. And so here we have that little burnt spot. As you can see, the fire started somewhere down here off to the left, and then just kind of got into the canopy, and it went whoosh right up to the top. Luckily, the local fire crews were able to get it stomped out and put out before it really got going. If it gets into the higher canopy, it'll just keep on going until, you know, there's nothing left to burn. So as you can see, the limbs on these two trees go clear to the, almost clear to the ground, and this is the optimal fire ladder that will allow a ground fire to reach up into the canopy. Once they get climbing up in the, you know, the flames get climbing up into the branches, they will spread to the rest of the stand. So you need to kind of, like I say, get it at about 6 foot or a little bit above off the ground. As you can see, you got dead limbs here too, and so the dead needles on there will catch fire really easy, and then easily spread to the rest of the dead limbs that are in the trees. So it's always a good idea to cut those guys out and just get rid of that material altogether. Granted, it kind of makes it look a little bit natural, but on the flip side of the coin, you're kind of literally playing with fire if you leave this kind of stuff there. So like I said, yellow pine is pretty much the predominant species here in the inland Pacific Northwest, and so it's a relative fire dependent species. Pardon my tongue twister there. And so it develops a fairly thick bark at the base, and this bark is, you know, it's kind of puzzle bark. As kids, we like to go up there and pluck at it. Not a good thing to do, because this thick bark actually protects the tree and its root system from fire damage when a low intensity fire comes through and scorches everything. Now if you have a strong detritus buildup at the base of your trees, when we were doing the fire break in McCall, we'd go into tree wells early on and burn out a little bit here and there. Not much, just enough to kind of take off, you know, an inch or so of the top layer, and then allow it to dry out and then go back. And that's how they combated some of the detritus buildup around some of the areas in Ponderosa State Park. Worked well, but you got to use extreme caution again. But like I say, these trees, they have a thick bark at the base, and it goes up quite a ways, and this is kind of where, you know, the fire protection, natural fire protection, jumps in. So now here we have a couple of dead trees. It's always definitely highly recommended to take out any dead ones that you might have on your property, just for that, you know, that fire safety purpose, regardless of the size. The last thing you need is a tree burning, you know, close to your house, and especially if it's dead, that's just adding fuel to the fire, literally. Well, as you can see, those trees over there, yeah, that's kind of loud. Well, as you can see, there's quite a bit of variation in the wildland urban interface, so to speak. You know, everybody has things laid out a little differently, and you know, that's fine. It's always good to be different, but you know, you definitely want to try to keep that fire danger down as much as you can. One thing you can do, especially if you're really into structure protection around your house, just put in a sprinkler system, you know, underground sprinkler system, and if fire is encroaching on your house, just turn it on. You know, you'll be surprised at how much you can accomplish with just such simple measures like that. It doesn't have to be, you know, an intense sprinkler system. It's just enough to moisten the surrounding vegetation down to the point where it can't burn. The other thing you can do for structure protection is put on tin roofs. Metal doesn't always look all that great, but it does prevent the spark, the shower of sparks coming down from a wildfire close by from actually setting your roof on fire. That's one thing about you know, asphalt shingles. They are flammable, so if you put metal on your roof, your chances of the roof catching fire have gone down by quite a considerable margin. Talk to your fire insurance agent about that, and if there's any subsidies, sometimes there is, sometimes there's not. It just depends on the area where you're at, and you know, go from there. But yeah, so I hope you found today's information useful, that you were able to glean a little something useful out of it. And well, everybody, I hope you were able to glean a little useful information out of today's little episode of Random Lengths. I realize I kind of ramble a little bit, but you know, there's a lot of information on the subject. The best thing to do is contact your local forestry department on a state level, not on the federal level, because the U.S. Forest Service, they're not really interested in private property unless they're, you know, looking to take it over or something like that. But other than that, the state agencies are the ones you need to talk to. They'll be the most help to you as well, or the local timber protective associations. There's all kinds of them around. Like I say, Idaho has several, especially in the McCall area. There is another one up here on the Palouse, but I'm not sure what their name is and where they're located at. But if you contact the Idaho Department of Lands, they'll be more than happy to point you in the right direction. So if you have any thoughts, comments, critiques, or suggestions, by all means put it in the comment section below. It's always good to have some dialogue going. And by all means, if you have somebody that's living in a setting like this, please recommend the video on to them so they can kind of prepare themselves and try to get their property up to snuff. Just because you're putting in some defensive measures, some fire protection measures, doesn't mean you have to forfeit the natural look and beauty of your property. So it's just a matter of, you know, enhancing what's there and making things kind of work out in your favor. So with that, thanks for watching, thanks for stopping by, and please don't forget to pass this video on to your friends and family who are in a similar situation. So with that, we'll see y'all in the next video.